For my banned book, Read Out Loud, I'll be reading To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. When Boo Radley shuffled to his feet, light from the living room windows glistened on his forehead. Every move he made was uncertain, as if he were not sure his hands and feet could make proper contact with the things he touched. He coughed his dreadful rolling cough, and was so shaken he had to sit down again. His hands searched for his hip pocket, and he pulled out a handkerchief. He coughed into it, then he wiped his forehead. Having been so accustomed to his absence, I found it incredible that he had been sitting beside me all this time, present. He had not made a sound. Once more he got to his feet. He turned to me and nodded toward the front door. "You'd like to say good night to Jim, wouldn't you, Mr. Arthur? Come right in." I led him down the hall. Aunt Alexandra was sitting by Jim's bed. "Come in, Arthur," she said. "He's still asleep." Dr. Reynolds gave him a heavy sedative. "Jen Louise, is your father in the living room?" "Yes, ma'am, I think so." "I'll just go speak to him a minute." Dr. Reynolds left some. Her voice trailed away. Boo had drifted to a corner of the room, where he stood with his chin up, peering from a distance at Jim. I took him by the hand, a hand surprisingly warm for its whiteness. I tugged him a little, and he allowed me to lead him to Jim's bed. Dr. Reynolds had made a tent-like arrangement over Jim's arm to keep the cover off, I guess, and Boo leaned forward and looked over it. An expression of timid curiosity was on his face, as though he had never seen a boy before. His mouth was slightly open, and he looked at Jim from head to foot. Boo's hand came up, but he let it drop to his side. "You can pet him, Mr. Arthur. He's asleep. You couldn't if he was awake, though. He wouldn't let you." I found myself explaining. "Go ahead." Boo's hand hovered over Jim's head. "Go on, sir. He's asleep." His hand came down lightly on Jim's hair. I was beginning to learn his body English. His hand tightened on mine, and he indicated that he wanted to leave. I led him to the front porch, where his uneasy steps halted. He was still holding my hand, and he gave no sign of letting me go. "Will you take me home?" He almost whispered it, in the voice of a child afraid of the dark. I put my foot on the top step and stopped. I would lead him through our house, but I would never lead him home. "Mr. Arthur, bend your arm down here like that. That's right, sir." I slipped my hand into the crook of his arm. He had to stoop a little to accommodate me, but if Miss Stephanie Crawford was watching from her upstairs window, she would see Arthur Radley escorting me down the sidewalk as any gentleman would do. We came to the street light on the corner, and I wondered how many times Dill had stood there hugging the fat pole, watching, waiting, hoping. I wondered how many times Jim and I had made this journey, but I entered the Radley front gate for the second time in my life. Boo and I walked up the steps to the porch. His fingers found the front doorknob. He gently released my hand, opened the door, went inside, and shut the door behind him. I never saw him again. Neighbors bring food and death and flowers with sickness and little things in between. Boo was our neighbor. He gave us 2 soap dolls, a broken watch and chain, a pair of good luck pennies in our lives. But neighbors give him in return. We never put back into the tree that we took out of it. We had given him nothing, and it made me sad. I turned to go home. Street lights winked down the street all the way to town. I had never seen our neighborhood from this angle. There were Miss Maddie's, Miss Stephanie's, there was our house. I could see the porch swing. Miss Rachel's house was beyond us, plainly visible. I could even see Mr. Dubose. I looked behind them. To the left of the brown door was a long shuttered window. I walked to it, stood in front of it, and turned around. In daylight, I thought, you could see to the post office corner. Daylight. In my mind, the night faded. It was daytime and the neighborhood was busy. Miss Stephanie Crawford crossed the street to tell the latest to Miss Rachel. Miss Maddie bent over her flowers. It was summertime, and 2 children scampered down the sidewalk toward a man approaching in the distance. The man waved, and the children raced each other to him. It was still summertime, and the children came closer. A boy trudged down the sidewalk, dragging a fishing pole behind him. A man stood waiting with his hands on his hips. Summertime and his children played in the front yard with their friend, enacting a strange little drama of their own invention. It was fall, and his children fought on the sidewalk in front of Mrs. Dubose. The boy helped his sister to her feet, and they made their way home. Fall and his children trotted to and fro around the corner, the day's woes and triumphs on their faces. They stopped at an oak tree, delighted, puzzled, apprehensive. Winter and his children shivered at the front gate, chill-houted against a blazing house. Winter and a man walked into the street, dropped his glasses, and shot a dog. Summer, and he watched his children's heart break. Autumn, again, and Boo's children needed him. Atticus was right. One time he said you never really know a man until you stand in his shoes and walk around in them. Just standing on the Radley porch was enough. The street lights were fuzzy from the fine rain that was falling. As I made my way home, I felt very old, but when I looked at the tip of my nose, I could see fine misty beads, but looking cross-eyed made me dizzy, so I quit. As I made my way home, I thought what a thing to tell Jim tomorrow. He'd be so mad he missed it he wouldn't speak to me for days. As I made my way home, I thought Jim and I would get grown, but there wasn't much else left for us to learn, except possibly algebra. Okay, well, that is my To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee, my banned book.